Kirby's supposed to be coming along any moment. He's, according to his message, finishing up a plate full of victuals, I believe. And in the meantime, I encourage people to cruise over to, I guess it'd be kind of hard to find him. What is this? Kerby Jackson's homepage.
Yeah.
That would be kirbyjackson.galice, which is GALICE mining.com. I think it's .com because this ends with a bunch of letters. But anyhow, I'm very impressed with the bio that is on Kirby's page. I read it for the first time the last time he was on.
Right.
I'd like to share with our audience the first paragraph because it's what I consider very impressive, considering we were just talking about what the word Egun means, ancestors and all that. Kerby Jackson is an author, independent gold miner, and historian living in southern Oregon's Rogue River Valley, an area where Zane Grey and Jack London often came to receive inspiration to write their own novels. In addition to being a multi-generation native of the Rogue River Valley, his father's family had been on the North American continent since the 1600s. He is a direct descendant of Sir Thomas More, lawyer, philosopher, statesman, and author of Utopia, who was beheaded for treason against Henry VIII in 1535. And of Martha Allen Carrier, supposed witch referred to by Cotton Mather as the Queen of Hell, hanged during the Salem witch craze in 1692. And her husband, Thomas Carrier, reported to have been of the two regicides who executed King Charles I of England. At least 3 of Jackson's ancestors fought in the Revolutionary War against the British Crown. That's my buddy from Oregon. And that probably explains a lot why he writes so well.
Comes from a long line of rogues and outlaws.
Right, but that bloodline, that's you got to be a lot of writers in that bloodline.
Well, adventurers, explorers,
gold miners.
Yeah, gold miners. Yeah,
it's kind of like the same thing. Yeah.
But that I wonder if that's what got him interested in doing history.
I know one of Kirby's projects is, and he doesn't speak any about it, and I can understand. And I think I'm safe saying that one of his projects is the restoration and possible. I don't know if it's going into production or if they're just there to restore it. But one of his main projects is working. I'm going to just say restoring an old gold mine.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll leave it at that because I remember mentioning that the first time he was on, and he said he might talk about it later, I think was the way he responded.
Well, if it's one of those ongoing things that because he's a very prodigious writer. I think in 1 month alone he had put out 4 different books, the history and a lot of them.
Wait, 1 month?
Well,
wait a minute. Let me correct you there. Remember, how long ago was it that I invited him on the show?
I don't know, because usually every time you talk to him, you invite him on the show. Yeah, well, yesterday was the last time.
And remember what he told me in the message, right? Because I said, first thing I said was, I don't know if Kerby understands I want him on tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Because in the message he said he was going to finish 4 books.
Yeah.
by the time he was on the show. Actually, if I'm not mistaken, he can correct me if I'm wrong when he comes on, but instead of 4, I think he finished 5. In 24 hours.
Yeah. I'm not sure when he sleeps, but
that's Kerby. And yeah, folks, we have an archive show with Kerby on, and it's a great show. A lot of information was shared that evening, as well this evening. And I told Kerby, I said, when I asked him on for tonight, he said, well, there's not really a lot of changes in Oregon going on right now. And I said, well, that's okay. I want Kerby to talk about Kerby and his books. Because, like we were saying, he writes Western novels, Louis L'Amour style, Zane Grey style. And I guess it stands to reason he's living in the same place that great authors like Jack London came to for inspiration. It might have a little bit to do with it, too.
I think so. Well, and it is beautiful countryside, and you can imagine, the pack mule trains, and going through the area on horseback or horse and buggy, and
it's a good thing we was on for 3 hours. He said he'd be here in a few minutes.
Okay.
Which is great.
And he can. I don't know how long. I've never run this show into archive since they changed the format, but
yeah, you can go. I think it's a half hour after.
Yeah.
Should be able to go 3.5 if need be.
So you might be able to get a whole hour with Kerby.
It's been a while since we went that far into archive, but I think it's still doable. We'll find out.
Well, the real show doesn't end till 11 o'clock for another half an hour, and if you want to be able to stay on the line and listen when and if we go into archives, you'll want to be dialed in at our call-in number at 917-889-7526, and that way you can be on the switchboard, or you can go back and listen after the show is archived. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes after the show's archived for it to show up on the switchboard. So you can go in and listen to the archived version of the show and listen to Oro's sound effects.
You're talking about the phone ringing, huh?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
It was stuck, I think.
Is that what that was? I thought it was one of them old-fashioned doorbells.
No, I thought maybe we'd just jump off into, that's a buzzer, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, and we're at the bottom of the hour.
Annoying buzzer. That's right.
Yeah, we're at the bottom of the hour, so it's time for another break anyway.
Yeah.
You pick it.
We're going to jump up in here, We're going to jump up here in the gold songs. We got lots of different choices.
And you're listening to Oro Expeditions 14 and then some on KDCL Media, the pride of Internet radio for Deep Creek Lake, Garrett County, Maryland. In too late, the world.
You said he's on the board. That's what it looks like. Mr. Kerby Jackson, I believe it is.
Yes, it is.
How are we doing this evening, sir?
Oh, we're not too bad. The weather's pretty fine here for the sort of dredge season up here in Oregon, such as it is. We've got the same issue everybody down in California has, but other than that, the weather's brilliant. The water level's good. A little bit of a nice breeze coming up off the Rogue here at the evening.
Yeah, I heard just this evening that they raised the fire level. I guess won't be any campfires for a while.
Well, they did, and one thing people are going to have to watch, I know last year there were some issues with the fire marshals going around and harassing people with obviously their dredge engines. So anybody who is out, they need to make sure they've got the spark arresters and things of that nature, and kind of do their best to talk themselves around those people.
Yeah, police up after yourself, but, as we do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked you on this evening, and you had told me that there's not a whole lot of changes since the last time you were on as far as Southwest Oregon, and we didn't have a lot of time last time you were on to talk about your penmanship and your books.
Right.
So how do you do 5 books in 24 hours?
Usually what happens with that is I'm usually sitting on a backlog of stuff I've been working on. So basically what I do, in addition to writing my own stuff, which I'm always doing that and always doing my own research, what started to happen about a year and a half ago was I started to have miners come to me and they said, I've heard of this book that was printed 100 years ago. Can you find it? And I would say, well, I've got one, but I don't know where to get any more. And they would say, can I get a copy of that? And so what I started to do was, because of the demand for that, I started going back through a lot of those old books that I thought had a lot of pertinent information for miners today that were in the public domain, and I started putting those back out. So in some cases, I've already got scanned files because I'm pretty good about backing my stuff up and always worrying about having the multiple copy in case the house burns down one day or something. It was always my concern, and backing copies up with friends over here and, this historical society over there. So needless to say, I started taking a lot of the work I was already doing as far as digitizing a lot of older mining works, and I started basically publishing that stuff back in paperback form again. So that's how I can do sometimes multiple titles in a night. Sometimes I'll have them already apart from actually laying them out, and I'm getting pretty good at that. So I can go pretty fast. It's just a matter of how much time I have, and sometimes I'll be 4 or 5 books ahead, and suddenly they'll kind of come out in a burst.
Right, and that's amazing because, and my hat's off to you, because what you're doing is assembling a historical archive. And that's important for us to be able to bring things from the past. We use it in the future, in the present, and future generations will be able to learn from it also.
Right, exactly. Because there's a problem, where, most of us who mine, especially those of us who mine for a living, we all know that the best way to go find some gold or some platinum or some copper or whatever we're looking for is to go where the old timers already found it. They've already done most of the work for us. The biggest problem we've got in this day and age, even with the internet and supposedly this myth that we have all this information at the touch of a button anytime we want it, is that it's actually pretty hard to find that information. There's a lot of these mines that operated 100 years ago that they were big mines. Sometimes they employed 100 people, 50 people, sometimes 200. If you get up here to the Granite Hill mine over here up north of me, they employed over 250 people at one time. And unfortunately, so much time has went on, there's nobody left today that was there at that time. You run into this in any other thing. If you've got a hobby or an interest, kind of the same thing. Once these old guys are gone, there's nobody left around who knew anything. And a lot of people, we get back into those older mines hoping to do something, and there's really no information out there. So I've kind of established myself as kind of the guy who's filling the information gap for those people who really do need information on mines, because there really is that issue where all that knowledge has been lost. But, it's still there if you know where to hunt for. So that's really what I'm working on, is trying to find that information that's important. It's not necessarily on a particular mine. It can be on a certain area and include all the mines in the area. And needless to say, I'm working on trying to get as much of that information out available to miners as soon as I can, and for a price that's affordable. There's an opportunity that if people want, and they can send me a request. People send me a request and say, hey, I'm from here and I'm mining here. Do you have anything on this? I probably do.
Well, now, how many states? I noticed on your list of books that there's a lot of different states mentioned, and areas of different areas of Oregon and so on. How many different geographical areas would you say your information covers?
At the moment that I have out in book form, I've got a lot of stuff on Oregon. I've got quite a bit of stuff on Idaho now out. There is quite a bit of stuff on California. I'm gradually working my way southward into California, trying to get into Southern California. And I just recently put out a new one on Alaska, on the Willow Creek District. So that's, 4 or 5 states now. And I've got some other stuff on Nevada and Idaho and Montana and Utah and the rest of the states that my eventual hope is to kind of get everything I have in all the different states and get at least something on everything out.
Right. Now, do you have any archival information or anything, or maybe possibly the process you're using for, say, the gold mines of the East before the 49er rush?
I do have some stuff on Georgia and the Carolinas and that area, so that is eventually in my plans. Right now I'm kind of where, most of us, we are mining on the West Coast because the mining law doesn't apply out East, obviously. That's all private land, always, pretty much has been forever.
Right.
At least, during the time of this country. So needless to say, I've kind of not prioritized that, but I do have that information stored in my archive, and I've got a very large archive here. I know that I've had a friend of mine asking me about, him wanting to back a lot of stuff I had up last night. We were trying to figure out how much data there actually was, and it was 7 or 8 terabytes worth. I'll put it that way. It's a lot. I really spend most of my time actively hunting for this stuff. But obviously most of my interest, it is Northern California, Southwest Oregon. That's, where I've always mined and where I've always lived for the most part, apart from my time in Washington and Idaho and also Europe. So needless to say, kind of here locally, most of my stuff is actually devoted kind of within about 100 miles of me, give or take.
And I've been doing a lot of reading, the previews and so on, and different information I can get about the different books that you have, and also you also are known for writing novels, isn't that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually started out originally before I started mining full time. I was actually a full time writer. So, and I've written in a lot of different genres. I've written, ghost writing for people, contract work, stuff like that, magazines. So, but about the thing I really like as far as writing fiction are westerns. So every now and then I'll put a western out or a little short collection of westerns. I don't really get to that as often as I'd like. I've got 8 or 9 kind of in the oven here that I'd like to finish, but it's just a matter of, where my time is.
It's funny you say that,
because I have more mining stuff or...
It's funny you say it that way, because I have a friend of mine I went to school with just 6 months ago said that the exact same thing, almost word for word. 6 or 8 on the burner, and not sure which one to finish.
And that's pretty much what happens with most writers. I mean, I've got stuff I wrote 20 years ago I never finished. That's sitting here that I could technically go back and finish it. I probably never will, but I've got basically, as far as novels, I've got 8 or 9 active projects back there that every now and then I'll take it out and I'll work a little bit on it. It may be 2 or 3 years down the road that it'll get done. It just kind of depends on my mood and also how busy I am.
Well, all this research that you've done in the various states, what have you come across stories of, like, haunted haunted mines or haunted ghost towns? I'll get it to
there is. You know what? There is actually a lot of that stuff that if you, for some reason, I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's just something in the makeup of miners, or maybe something we got from the Welsh miners, who were some of the first ones that came over. There really is, for some reason, though, a tendency for miners to tell a lot of ghost stories. And even a lot of the early writers like Bret Harte, he told a lot of ghost stories that involved mines. So there really is a lot of stuff like that out there. And we've got, obviously there's a lot of stories from California and Nevada and other states, as well as up here in Oregon, that go down that road.
Are there any there in your area?
There are here and there. There's a lot of little legends about mines. For example, there's a story about that, and keep in mind a lot of these, they're probably not even true. It's just stories that get passed around about miners. There was a story about the Howland mine out of Galice that there was supposedly some very rich ore discovered, and there was a Chinese crew working in it. And the story around Galice was in the early years is that I guess the Chinese crew disappeared. And I think what actually happened with them was I think they just wandered off and went to work for another mine. But the story around Galice is that whoever owned the mine at the time basically they had discovered something very rich, and they basically locked the crew inside the mine and blew it shut. So that's one of those stories that are out there. There's a story about the gold bug mine, about a few miners drowning in the bottom levels of that mine, and that mine supposedly haunted. There was when Josephine County Historical Society auctioned the picks off, which is kind of a satellite claim of the gold bug. They had taken some photos and were kind of convinced there was a little ghost in there and had some fun with that. So there's a lot of these little stories like that going around, and there always have been.
Cool. We'll have to make a look.
And I'm definitely interested in that sort of stuff, and I've been in a lot of mines, and I can honestly say I've never been in one that I thought was haunted. Every now and then you do get into these places where, in addition to researching mines, I like to go find them. And a lot of times you'll get down some of these old trails. They're old mining trails. They haven't been used for years and years and years, but they were so well established that these trails that are 100 years old, but they're still there. And sometimes you can be in the brush and you really expect somebody to be coming around the corner to you. Right as you're going around a corner, you seem to always expect somebody to be there coming around the corner, like you're going to run into another miner. And there never is anybody there. But it just, there definitely is out there in that mining country. There's definitely that feeling that's there, that, you kind of get the impression that the old timers should be there. And maybe they are.
I found out, that's where I first learned when I was up in Josephine Creek there at the National Forest. There at, I think, Blue Bridge, but it's really a green bridge, I think, if I remember right.
Uh-huh. Yeah, green bridge.
I was there, and we had it set up where, because the government was shut down, we were doing some dredging. And the whole time I was dredging, one day by myself, it was that way. I mean, I couldn't tell what it was felt like a lot of people around me that were really tired. And
right. Yeah.
now here's what happened. That there was the stories of the dredges that worked that stream in the Illinois there, those two stretches, and deposited the that's the reason for the tailing piles that are there. Well, the stories that go around with the local miners there is the one ghost story that was told, I'd call it a ghost story, is that as the Chinese would die, the Chinese were employed to carry by hand, one by one, these rocks up the side of this canyon.
Right.
And some of these rocks are upwards of 150, 200 yards from the surface of the river, up the mountain.
Right.
And there's piles of them that are the size of houses, just to put it into perspective.
Oh, yeah.
And the story is that if somebody, they worked them so hard that if they happened to lay down and die, that they just got covered up in these tailing piles.
that sounds like one of our typical local stories. Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah, I have heard that. Most of those Chinamen that were here, most of them actually, after they died, there were quite a few that were killed here. There were several killed at the old Channel Mine, and sometimes during ditch projects they would get killed. And usually what would happen, they would usually have a relative or an agent come back from China would usually dig them up and take their remains back, because that was part of their belief system. So they would always, they had a very strong belief that if their remains did not rest in basically their hometown, that they didn't rest peacefully. So needless to say, for the most part, most of the Chinese that died here, most of them, they wound up going back to China. There are a couple cases of a few guys that they did want to become naturalized citizens. I know there was a miner out in Waldo that was a Chinaman. He specifically requested that his gravesite be hidden. And he basically had his friends hide his grave because he didn't want to be dug back up and shipped back to China. But needless to say, for the most part, most of those guys, they all went back. But you never know.
Yeah.
There could be some guys out there underneath those tailing piles.
Right. Now the one thing I do know that felt really weird when I was in California, there was one particular mine I was in down there where the gentleman that was showing me the inside of the mine, and we were in there doing a little prospecting, and we got to this one location, and he said, okay, right where you're standing is the location where 32 Chinese miners died.
Yeah.
Because of misdirection of a blast is what happened. And it was interesting because this story had been passed down through his generations, from that time that it had happened to the point where he was able to pinpoint the location.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. There's kind of a similar story out there on Galeese Creek where it's kind of a combination ghost story, lost mine story that supposedly the Chinese were working on the South Fork of Galeese Creek, and there was and they had a large sluice down in the creek, several hundred feet long. And that supposedly that hillside had come off and buried them in the sluice, and needless to say, they say the Chinamen are still there and the gold's still there also. There's a lot of people go looking for that. I did actually have a friend of mine in a place I used to mine before when I first started in Galeese, when I was quite a bit younger, that he did actually dredge up a gold tooth that was definitely of Chinese origin that he found in that creek there where I used to mine.
Wow!
Holy cow!
There's a lot of strange stuff goes on in that creek. I know a lot of people who I've told you it's withdrawn area, did a lot of mining in there, and I know quite a bit about it. And it's kind of one of those places you always get the sensation when you're down there mining on your own that you'll just kind of peek your head up and look up on the bank and think somebody's watching you. Just kind of like, well, there's somebody around. Is it BLM or another miner, or who is it?
Mm-hmm.
But I do know several people who've actually been kind of run out of that place. I knew some people came down and they stayed there overnight, and they were sleeping in a minivan up at the camp spot, and they found that at about 3 a.m, something came up and just started rocking back and forth in their minivan, and they got the hell out of there. They were convinced something was there. And I know another guy who, kind of the same sort of thing, he was there with his dog, and he said he woke up about 2 a.m, and his dog started growling, and he just thought the dog needed to go to the bathroom, and he needed to go to the bathroom, so he goes out there, and he was so convinced that there was somebody out there in the brush that he couldn't see, even though he was shining the light around and all that. He was so convinced he left in the middle of the night and turned at a friend of mine's house, slept in his driveway the rest of the night. And I had another friend that used to do some dredging with me there. He'd heard a lot of these stories, and he was down there in the creek on his own one night, and he dredged this hole, and he was getting pretty good gold out of it. And he said he kept getting this creeping sensation he was being watched, and eventually he said, "Oh, to hell with you, you can have it," and he packed his stuff up and he left. And as far as I know, I don't think he's ever been back. That he swears up and down that he just says, "I'll not mine in there on my own anymore."
Yeah, it's amazing the way history hangs around in some areas.
Oh yeah, and I think it does.
Mm-hmm. So the Gleese mining district and so on and everything. We was questioning it earlier before you called in. We were talking about did a story about what's coming up with the 21st of June here in California, and what's your thoughts as far as the moratorium in California? You think, from what you're hearing, there's any possibility of being back in the water?
There seems to be, based on some information that Brandon Reinhardt sent out here not that long ago, a few days ago, that I think where the judge wants to look at, I think it's basically the home state case, so it's South Dakota Mining versus Lawrence County, South Dakota, that to me, where the judge is actually going to review that decision by the Eighth Circuit Court, I think that's positive. I think that the judge in that case, he's obviously really going to take a look and see what was said in that case as far as that's concerned. And I think my interpretation of the law, and pretty much everybody else's, if he reads that case, he should agree with it and say this moratorium is illegal and strike it down. That's my hope. That's obviously the best case scenario, and I kind of have a feeling that may be what happens. I mean, I don't know if we're going to get the result we want. I mean, who knows? You know, when we went into court up here, you know, we had made these arguments, and when it was done, I looked at it and I went through the final of it. And we had quite a bit of input here and there, and I kind of looked at it and I thought, there's no way we can lose. That was my thought. But I thought the case was sound enough that, you know, we pretty much had a slam dunk.
Right.
And unfortunately, the judge comes back and she says, well, you know, the state really should take this under advisement, and I really don't disagree with any of the argument here, but you're not harmed enough yet. And it's kind of like, okay, well, if this was a murder case, it's like you got to kill me first before I can do anything to the murderer. And that's kind of how it is. It's kind of like they're very hinged on this, how much you have to be injured. And that's kind of the bad thing, that you really need. That's kind of why we've been reluctant not to, you know, we're going to go back into court over 838 up here, but we haven't done it yet, largely because we're just kind of sitting here waiting to see what happens and hoping to find somebody who's actually been injured enough.
Now, what do you think about the idea of California saying, okay, boys back in the water, boys and girls with your dredges? What do you think that's going to mean in Oregon? Do you think they'll follow suit, or do you think they'll go off on their own with their own decisions?
I think that, you know, it's all federal court. This has to be decided in. So I think, you know, obviously if we win in California, which, as I said earlier, I think we will. Mm. I think the courts up here, I think the Oregon District Court, they'll follow suit with whatever the California court says. But I think it's going to be one of these things we're going to have to drag the state of Oregon kicking and screaming, the same way as California has been. You know, and that's been kind of the situation in California. Regardless of what the law said, the miners have had to kind of drag the state of California kicking and screaming because it doesn't seem to matter to them what the law says.
Well, from what I've heard coming out of Idaho, they are basically waiting for California so that they can step forward and be, you know, just like them, basically. That's the word I'm hearing from quite a few people there.
And that's kind of the same thing I think going on in Washington. And the concern I have, and this is really what I've been kind of ringing the bell about to a lot of miners, especially the commercial miners. I know quite a few of them. Is my biggest concern is if we don't stop it. You know, I had brought this up when we were fighting 838 here in Oregon, that it was only California then, and I said if we lose here in Oregon, Idaho's going to be next, Washington's going to be next. And sure enough, that's what's going on. It's now Idaho, now it's Washington.
And then
my concern is that if we don't stop it,
even came into it, you know.
Yeah, in Tennessee and I think Maine, they're also in it. And my concern is that if we don't stop them in Idaho, in Washington, which ultimately means we have to stop them in California first, or here.
Right.
If we don't stop them in Idaho and Washington, it's going to go to Alaska next. And I think if Alaska falls, the environmentalists are going to turn both barrels on Nevada, and if they get Nevada, it's all over with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then we're basically set back with the mining law 170 years. You know, where we cease to have granted minerals, and it's all owned by the government as a collective, and they can do whatever they want, and they can sell it to the highest bidder. You know, foreign corporations, banks, you name it.
There you hit the nail on the head right there. I think that's what it's all about, is corporations.
Oh, it is. It's
the energy corporations. You know, I mean, if you're in big oil right now, your biggest fear is hemp, because it's coming back. You know, hemp is gonna wipe out a lot of industry if it's done right. But the good news is it's not going to wipe out that industry, so to speak, as far as manpower and jobs and so on, because those will be replaced at least 2 to 3-fold. And people, you know, can learn how. That's just one of many industries that they just. I believe the industry, you know, industrial age. They talk about the industrial age. That it's a secret industrial age today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's kind of, if you go, and I've said this before, and I've actually covered this quite a bit in a lot of my discussions at, say, the Roseburg Gold Show, that I've, you know, a lot of times done intros for Hal Anthony where he's discussed mining law, and I've kind of discussed the history of it. Mm-hmm. And if you really go back and study it, it really is about the elite. You know, this is the bankers and the large corporations. And I don't mean the guy you think is a rich guy who lives on the hill up the road from you. Because that guy, by comparison to those bankers and, you know, basically back in the day, the Morgans, the Rockefellers, those guys, he's dirt poor compared to them. He's not elite. He may just be kind of a local player. That even going back before this mining law started, there was a big debate going on of whether these minerals and this land out here should belong to the individual who puts his initiative forward, and he goes out and he claims it and he develops it and he gets his patent. Whether it should be under that system or whether it should basically be under the system of oligarchs where the high bidder gets it and the government can sell it to whoever the high bidder is and forget the little people. And fortunately, our forerunners, you know, William Stewart and a lot of those guys who started this mining law, and keep in mind with this mining law, they didn't write it. They just followed what the miners were already doing in California and here in Oregon. Mm-hmm. You know, that they had camp law, and that's all our mining law is. It is federal recognition of local rules and regulations of mining districts. And really back there, if you study that, that's very tied in with the Civil War. There's a lot of theories that Abe Lincoln was shot and assassinated basically because he refused to give the minerals to the bankers and the elites and so on and so forth. And needless to say, I think when you really study that stuff, so kind of a good starting point if people want to learn about this, go read William Stewart's autobiography. And he was really the father of our mining law, and he talks about it, and he names names, and he says what was going on then. So in my opinion, we're actually kind of in a similar situation to what they were in 1863, 1864, and 1865 before the mining law. You know, where we're kind of at this crossroads of, are we going to continue to have the minerals in the hands of the average person on the grounds that he can go out, claim it, develop it, do something with it, or is it going to belong to the high bidder through the government? And we're kind of back to that.
Right.
You know,
and I'm in your camp as far as California. I believe, you know, from what I've heard and people I'm hearing it from, that I think we're going to be able to turn the dredges loose here probably before the end of this season.
I think so. I really do believe that.
And that's a major victory, like you said, because the other states.
That would be. And but at the same time, I think that if we lose down there, it's kind of all downhill from there.
Yep.
You know, that we're, like I said, it's like, you know, it's like 1863, 1864 all over again where we're at this crossroads, and it can kind of go either way now.
Well, it could also be at the crossroads, kind of like alcohol prohibition, where everybody said, well, we're going to drink it, we're going to make it, we'll just go to the woods and do it. You know? Right. And exactly. we talked about that last year in Tennessee. There was a lot of conversation around the fire about, if they outlaw it, what are you going to do? And people like myself and you and others that you know, it's more than just a passion, it's more of a livelihood and so on. We all agreed that we're going to go do it anyway. And
exactly.
so
yeah.
it may mean that you need to get a little deeper back in the woods, but I look at it as a way of life. I'm looking at it as a way to support myself and Miss Paula and everything that we have going. So to me, that's the same as the government saying you're not allowed to go down the road down here and build somebody's house, or you're not allowed to go drive somebody's truck. They want to keep me from my employment.
Right. And it's all the same thing. It's the same agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's listeners out there that they haven't been around this enough to understand that, but they will.
Right.
I'm sure that when I start talking about bankers and mineral cartels and things of that nature, they go, that's crazy talk, but they really need to study it and really kind of learn what's actually going on in this country. And it's not just this country, but it's important for people to realize, even if they're not miners, they need to understand that our mining law in the history of the world is completely unique. There has never been another mining law like it, with our old original public land system that basically, at one time, our government, through Congress, the vast majority of them at one time believed that if they gave people the opportunity to go get property and develop it, that basically the nation would prosper. And kind of in the time that it's changed from that to where all this land out here has been made unavailable to people, it's kind of all been downhill from there. That all really started in the 70s, kind of in the 50s, and then especially through the 70s and early 80s, really downhill from there. And kind of if you look at the economic welfare of the country, it's gone down in decline right along with it. Because if you choke that resource production out, you really don't have much.
Well, and they've even managed to seriously affect the price of gold. If you look at a 10-year chart on gold, it was a steady climb with some pretty good sized speed bumps along the way, but it was a steady climb for a long time up until this 1900 peak. And ever since that 1900 peak, it's gone steady down, and then luckily we're wavering between 12 and 11 and 1300 here for the last 5 or 6 months now. And
it's at least pretty steady now, which is a good sign.
Well, now just to finish things up here on that, I've heard that when the stock market's going down and gold's going up, that's a sign of the economy being bad, and vice versa.
Right.
When the Dow and so on is up, gold's down. Now, what do you figure it means when they're both in the green at the same time in a big way, or both in the red at the same time?
I would say that the market's being manipulated.
There you go. And hey, Kerby,
that would be my response to that.
Yep. And we'll leave that one for another show.
And the same way with silver.
It's funny you bring up silver. We just gave away some.
Oh, nice.
You wasn't on the right show, so you missed out on that.
Oh, bummer.
But in just to bring the show to a wrap, out of all of your books, which one would you say would be most important to you, or the one that you'd like for people, say, to start with, the most important read that you've written?
Probably the most important one that I've put out, in my opinion, that's really going to appeal to all miners. It's a small book. It's not that big. It's only about 60 or 70 pages, and it's an 8.5 by 11 book. It's called Prospecting and Developing a Small Mine. And that was originally put out by the Idaho Bureau of Mines years and years and years ago. And basically it leads you at that time, and most of this is still applicable today. Obviously the mining law has changed in that regard, and there's some of the things on staking claims that aren't quite the same and relevant anymore. But the actual information as far as how to go out, find the minerals, sample for them properly, develop a mine, and to do it basically in a manner that's actually going to get you somewhere. That is probably the most valuable book I've put out, even though it's really one of the smaller ones. I think it's, I think it's $11 or $12. It's just a little thing. It's, like I said, it's 8.5 by 11 and 60 or 70 pages. But I think out of all of them, it's probably the most important. That's really the one, if somebody wants to learn how to actually mine for a living, that's really the one they need. And obviously I've got a lot of books that are area specific. There's one I put out called The Mines of Oregon. That is the reprint of the famous Golden Oregon book, Gold and Silver in Oregon, that was put out by Dogami 40 or 50 years ago that's no longer available. There's some others that are Oregon specific. There's some that are California specific that are, fairly important if you were living in those areas.
Right. Well, hey, Kerby, it's been a pleasure having you back.
Traveling high and low, searching for that quote.
Not sure what happened there. Keep switchboard. Oh, I know. We just went into archive and it turned the music up. Hey, That's okay. That's how everybody knows we're live radio. See, but
oh yeah.
What I was saying was we're going to be headed that direction possibly within the next week or so, and I'm really looking forward to catching up with you and meeting you and getting together in person, possibly even getting a little gold mining in. You never know.
Oh, yeah, we can do that.
We can also, I'm looking forward to having you and Hal Anthony in the same room. That might be interesting also.
It's been a while since me and Hal have been in the same room. I think the last time we talked together was when we were up there at Roseburg at the Gold Show.
Well, we're gonna
him and I together. We do pretty well because we've got two different directions we come at things from. So I mean, it's kind of a good combination.
We'll give you a good reason for a reunion. How about the first show for Tuesday night, Oro Expeditions 14, and then some from the Grants Pass, Galice area, and special guest Hal Anthony and that other guy.
Kerby Jackson.
That's okay. I can't remember my own name either.
No, I remember. I was just pulling your leg there a little bit, but I was figuring maybe we'll put you top billing. We'll let you and Hal figure that one out.
Yeah, you should, while you're here, you should also talk to Tom Kitchar from Waldo Mining District. He's usually a pretty good guest, and he doesn't do a lot of interviews, but he would definitely be a guy you'd want to talk to while you're here. He's out there in Old House.
Well, if things go
really,
according
really
to
good
plan,
historic mining area, and he knows a lot about that area.
Well, if things go according to plan, it's not going to be a matter of while we're there. It's going to be a matter of, hey, we're here for good.
Well, I certainly hope so.
That's what we're working on. So, there we go. Too many names, not enough time.
Yep.
Kerby, it's like I said, it's been a pleasure, and thanks for showing up on short notice. And I just wanted you to have some time to talk about what you do besides the gold mining, which is the writing. And I've had the pleasure of catching up with some of your stuff, and it's pretty incredible as far as I'm concerned. If you're a gold miner,
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and even the fiction, because you can sit around a campfire after you're done gold mining and just kick back with a good Western fiction.
See, and I don't even think anybody even read them.
Well, we're gonna have to wrap this one up. We're already into archive tonight, and I want to get you back on. Like I said, we'll be in that neighborhood sometime. The plan is before the end of June. So until then, Kerby, you have a great evening, and thanks again for joining us tonight.
Okay, I'll talk to you guys later.
All righty, man.
Okay, bye-bye.
Keep your bottom of your pan yellow.
Good night, Kerby.
Oh, yeah. You too. Bye-bye.